Archaeology, that discipline dedicated to unearthing the secrets of time, has been warning for decades that our understanding of the remote past is, at best, fragmentary. However, few discoveries have generated such a potent mix of fascination, discomfort, and scientific bewilderment as the discovery of submerged structures in the depths of the Caribbean Sea. What began as a technical exploration mission has turned into a mystery that, after more than 2 decades, it still lacks a definitive explanation, defying the pillars of human chronology and modern geology. Leave your like, subscribe, and share. Let's begin. The story of this discovery did not originate from a search for legendary treasures or an obsession with the mythical Atlantis, but from the precision and pragmatism of contemporary marine engineering. At the beginning of the 21st century, a team of researchers led by the marine engineer Paulina Zalitsky and her husband, Ernesto Trizna, was conducting a sweep of the ocean floor off the Guanahacabibes Peninsula in the westernmost part of Cuba. They worked for a Canadian company, ADC, Advanced Digital Communications, specializing in high-tech underwater exploration. Its main mission was technical and lucrative, to locate shipwrecks from the Spanish colonial era, an area rich in shipwrecks full of history and potentially treasure. However, the technology of side-scan sonar returned an image that froze the mood on the bridge. On high-resolution screens, at an abyssal depth of between 600 and 700 meters, no remains of rotten wood or rusted metal from a galleon appeared. What the underwater drone and surface sensors revealed were shapes that were too orderly, too symmetrical, and too massive to be the product of the whims of currents or geological chance. The images showed pyramidal structures of colossal dimensions with wide bases and peaks that suggested a ceremonial or defensive purpose. Straight lines and 90-degree angles, extremely rare elements in nature, where erosion tends to smooth the edges. Circular patterns perfectly defined which, seen from above, resembled squares or social meeting places. Geometric alignments that stretched for kilometers, forming what experts could only call avenues. For Zalitsky's team, the conclusion was immediate and chilling. They were observing a cityscape frozen in time. They stood before the silhouettes of what appeared to be an entire city, a complex human settlement, but located in a place where, according to the accepted laws of history, nothing similar should ever have existed. The real conflict that this discovery poses to science is not only the existence of cut stones, but their location and the age that this implies. This is where the forgotten city of the Caribbean becomes an anomaly impossible for traditional academia to digest. For these structures to have been built on the surface by humans, the sea level in the Caribbean would have had to have been hundreds of meters lower than it is today. Climate and geological models of the last glaciation, the glacial maximum of about 20,000 years, indicate that sea level dropped, at most about 120 meters. If the structures are 700 meters deep, scientific logic faces a crossroads. Either the structures have tens of thousands of years, a time when, according to archaeology, humans were just beginning to make simple stone tools, or the continental shelf in that area of Cuba suffered a catastrophic and sudden tectonic subsidence, taking a city from the surface to the abyss in the blink of a geological eye. Any of these options force us to rewrite textbooks. If the city has 6,000 years, as some dating of surrounding sediments suggests, its presence at that depth is an absolute geological mystery. If the city was built when that land was above sea level, we would be talking about an advanced civilization that existed more than 50,000 years ago, something that current science considers simply impossible. The images obtained by Zalitsky's team were not blurry patches of sand. Underwater robots, ROVs, equipped with cameras were used which, despite the difficulties of lighting and pressure at that depth, allowed glimpses of stone blocks that looked like polished granite. The site design suggests sophisticated urban planning. It's not just a pile of rocks, but an organized center. The presence of pyramids aligned with what appear to be cardinal axes points to a culture with knowledge of astronomy and mathematics, similar to what we would see thousands of years later in the Mayan or Aztec cultures, but on a timescale and depth that breaks all the rules. Who could these builders have been? Some independent researchers suggest that the Caribbean was once a fertile valley connected by land bridges before massive melting at the end of the Ice Age flooded the basins. However, the precision of the cuts in the stone, perfect right angles and flat surfaces indicates the use of tools that archaeology does not associate with peoples from that time 6,000 years ago, and much less from earlier times. As expected, given a discovery that threatens the status quo, the scientific community quickly split into two irreconcilable fronts. The majority view among academic geologists and oceanographers is that the formations are natural. They argue that the Caribbean seabed is an area of high tectonic activity. Under extreme pressures and plate movements, certain types of rock, such as basalt or hard limestone, can fracture geometrically. They invoke a psychological phenomenon called pareidolia, the tendency of the human brain to find familiar shapes, such as faces, animals, or buildings, in random patterns. For skeptics, what Paulina Zalitsky called avenues are simply natural cracks in the bedrock, and the pyramids are volcanic or tectonic formations that, by pure coincidence, took on a triangular shape. They argue that without physical samples collected directly from the structures, pieces of stone showing marks from human tools, the find should be classified as a geological curiosity. On the other hand, proponents of the artificial hypothesis, including several dissenting archaeologists, argue that nature rarely repeats complex geometric patterns in such a concentrated area. Nature can create an angle of 90 degrees, but it doesn't create an entire city with urban planning and circular plazas by accident, they argue. For this group, the structures off Cuba are proof of a vanished civilization that could have been the root of many Mesoamerican cultures. They point out that civilizations like the Olmec or the Maya seem to appear in history already with advanced knowledge of writing, astronomy, and architecture, as if they had inherited their knowledge from an earlier source. Could that source be the city that now rests beneath the Caribbean? Leave a like, subscribe, and share. The discovery of Guanahacabibes is not alone. In the last 2 decades, underwater technology has begun to reveal that the seabed is, in reality, a vast archive of human history that we are only just beginning to read. The Cuban case is the most extreme of all due to its depth. While a recreational diver can visit Yonaguni, the ruins off Cuba require an industrial-level operation. This has allowed the mystery to be preserved, but it has also prevented it from being solved. It is fascinating to observe how the discovery of the underwater drone resonates with the oral tradition of the indigenous peoples of the Caribbean and Central America. Many of these cultures have myths about catastrophic floods and lands that sank beneath the ocean. The people of the Antilles spoke of a time when the islands were much larger and connected. Legends about a sacred island that was the origin of their wisdom and that disappeared after a great earthquake are recurrent. Historically, these stories were dismissed as pure mythology, but modern underwater findings are forcing anthropologists to reconsider whether these myths are, in fact, distorted memories of real geological events that affected early civilizations. If the finding is so promising, why hasn't it been investigated further in recent decades? The answer is as pragmatic as it is painful: money and politics. Exorbitant cost. An expedition to 700 meters in depth is not a weekend project. It requires ships with dynamic positioning systems, ROVs, remotely operated vehicles that cost thousands of dollars an hour, and teams of scientists from multiple disciplines. Academic risk. For a career archaeologist, betting on a submerged city of 6,000 years ago is a huge professional risk. If the project fails or the stones are proven to be natural, their reputation would be damaged. Academia tends to be conservative and prefers to fund projects with guaranteed results. Bureaucracy. The ruins are located in Cuban territorial waters. Political tensions and research restrictions in the area have historically hampered international collaboration and the entry of private capital for deep exploration missions. From 2001, no new official investigations have been carried out with the same intensity as the original mission. The debate is fueled by the same sonar images from a while ago, 20 years ago, analyzed time and time again by experts from all over the world, without a new piece of the puzzle emerging. The case of the submerged city in Cuba has become a scientific ghost. For some, it is the perfect example of how enthusiasm can cloud critical judgment, leading to seeing cities where there are only rocks. For others, it is the greatest missed opportunity of modern archaeology, a discovery that could rewrite our understanding of the origin of civilization. If we accept for a moment the possibility that they are artificial, we are faced with disturbing questions. How could a city be illuminated at such a depth if it had always been there? The obvious answer is that it wasn't built there, but rather it sank. What kind of technology made it possible to cut such massive blocks of stone with such precision? What event caused a continental shelf to collapse 600 meters? Geology tells us that such rapid subsidences are extremely rare, but not impossible. Platform collapse events can occur due to massive earthquakes or seabed instability. If this happened while a city was inhabited, we would be facing the true story behind the myth of Atlantis. A tragedy of unimaginable proportions that erased from the face of the earth all evidence of an advanced culture. As underwater drone technology becomes more accessible and cheaper, hopes are growing that a new generation of explorers will return to the Guanahatabibes Peninsula. The new systems of 3D photogrammetry and underwater laser scanners, blue LiDAR, could map structures with millimeter resolution, allowing them to distinguish between a natural fracture and the mark of a human chisel. Until that day arrives, the ruins of the Caribbean remain in absolute darkness, bathed by the cold currents and the silence of the abyss. They continue to pose a challenge to our certainty about the past. Archaeology has taught us that what is accepted today as absolute truth can be overturned by a single discovery. It happened with Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which showed that humans built monumental temples much earlier than previously thought possible. It could happen again in the waters of Cuba. The underwater drone that revealed these ruins didn't just find stones, it found a mirror reflecting our own ignorance. The history of humanity is much longer, more complex and more mysterious than we are willing to admit in our textbooks. We are living in a time of technological transition where, for the first time, we have the tools to look into the deepest corners of our planet. The ocean, which covers 70% of the Earth, is the largest museum in the world, and the vast majority of its galleries are still closed to the public. The submerged city of Cuba is a reminder that beneath the waves may lie the answers to who we are and where we come from. Until we return with the technology needed to touch those stones, the mystery will remain there, defying the sunlight, waiting for us to be brave enough or curious enough to descend back into the darkness and reclaim our lost history. Do we really know when civilization began? Perhaps the answer lies not in the stars nor in the desert sands, but 700 meters under the turquoise blue of the Caribbean, waiting for its moment to change everything. Leave a like, subscribe, and share. See you next time.